In over 25 years of television, Judge Judy has heard every excuse imaginable. She's listened to lies wrapped in confidence, lies whispered through tears, and lies shouted with pure arrogance. But on this particular day, a lie crossed a line so serious, so disturbing, that it forced her to stop the courtroom cold, not to shout, not to threaten, but to listen more closely than she ever had before. Because this wasn't just another exaggeration or a conveniently forgotten detail. This was a lie told under oath, in front of millions of viewers, by someone who claimed to stand for truth itself. The person sitting confidently at the plaintiff's table wasn't a hardened criminal. She wasn't a career scammer with a long paper trail. She wasn't even someone the audience was prepared to dislike. She was a pastor's wife. A woman who introduced herself as a devout believer. A woman who spoke softly, dressed modestly, and carried herself with the calm assurance of someone used to being trusted. And from the very first moment she opened her mouth, she made it clear she expected that trust to follow her into the courtroom. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue aggressively. She didn't need to. Her words were carefully chosen, almost rehearsed, as if she had practiced them many times before. She spoke about faith, about honesty, about being wronged, and as she placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, she never hesitated, not even for a second. To most people watching, she looked exactly like what she claimed to be, a righteous woman dragged into court by an unfair system. But here's what most viewers didn't notice. In the first 90 seconds, before the evidence, before the testimony, before a single document was examined, Judge Judy noticed something that didn't sit right. It wasn't a contradiction. It wasn't a factual error. It was something far more subtle. Something in the way the story was being told. Something in the confidence behind the words. Something that suggested this woman wasn't just telling her version of the truth, she was performing it. Judge Judy didn't interrupt. She didn't challenge her. She didn't show skepticism on her face. She simply listened. And that silence was not accidental. Because when someone is lying under oath, especially someone who believes they're morally untouchable, the most dangerous thing you can do is let them keep talking. Every extra sentence becomes a risk. Every added detail becomes a potential crack. And this woman, convinced that her faith alone made her credible, kept going. She spoke about how hurt she was, about how unfairly she'd been treated, about how she would never lie because lying went against everything she believed in. And as she spoke, she leaned harder and harder into that image of a woman above suspicion, a woman whose word should never be questioned. That's when the courtroom atmosphere shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, because the more she emphasized her righteousness, the more dangerous her testimony became. Judge Judy has always said that the courtroom is not a church, not a therapy session, and not a stage for moral performances. It's a place for facts, and when someone tries to replace facts with faith, that's when things get serious. Very serious. Especially when that faith is being used as armor against accountability. If you believe no one should be above the truth, not politicians, not celebrities, and especially not people who hide behind religion, stay with me on this one. Because what started as a routine case would quickly turn into one of the most uncomfortable moments ever seen on daytime television. A moment where a carefully built image began to crack. A moment where words spoken under oath would come back with consequences no amount of prayer could undo. At this point, the pastor's wife still believed she was in control. She believed her reputation would protect her. She believed the judge would hesitate. And she believed the courtroom would treat her differently because of who she claimed to be. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy had already seen enough to ask herself a question she never asks lightly. Is this person using faith as a shield for dishonesty? And once that question enters Judge Judy's mind, the outcome is never gentle. From the moment the pastor's wife sat down at her table, she understood exactly how she wanted to be seen. Her clothing was modest and carefully chosen, not flashy, not expensive, not attention-seeking. Neutral colors. Conservative cut. Nothing that could suggest vanity or excess. It was the kind of outfit that quietly said respectable, the kind that blended humility with intention. She folded her hands neatly in front of her, posture straight but relaxed, as if she had nothing to hide and nowhere else she would rather be. When she spoke, her voice was soft, measured, almost soothing. There was no anger in it, no edge, no desperation. She didn't rush her words, and she didn't stumble over them either. Every sentence felt calm, controlled, and rehearsed, not in an obvious way, but in the way someone sounds when they've told the same story enough times to believe it themselves. She wasn't talking at the court. She was speaking to it, as though she expected understanding, sympathy, even protection. She made it clear who she was before she ever explained why she was there. She was a pastor's wife, a woman deeply involved in her church, a person whose life, according to her, revolved around service, honesty, and moral responsibility. She spoke about faith not loudly, not dramatically, but casually, like it was a fact so obvious it didn't need emphasis. And in doing so, she framed herself as someone whose character alone should answer any doubts. She described herself as honest, not just truthful, but incapable of dishonesty. She reminded the court that she was God-fearing, that she lived by principles, that lying under oath wasn't just illegal to her, it was unthinkable. And then she positioned herself as the victim. A woman dragged into court unfairly. A woman whose name had been questioned, whose integrity had been challenged, whose trust had been betrayed. She didn't accuse loudly. She let the implication do the work. Across from her sat the opposing party, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. They didn't look confident. They didn't look prepared for television. They shifted in their seat, hands clasped tightly, eyes darting between the judge and the woman accusing them. Their voice, when they spoke, wasn't smooth. It wavered slightly. Not because they were lying, but because they were nervous, intimidated. This wasn't just a legal battle for them, it was a social one. They explained their situation plainly. They talked about financial strain, about legal fees piling up, about the stress of standing in court against someone who seemed untouchable, someone with a respected name, someone backed by a church community. And while they tried to stay composed, it was clear they felt smaller in that room. Not because they lacked facts, but because they lacked status. There is a quiet power that comes with religious authority in America, especially in small communities, and the pastor's wife knew it. She didn't need to threaten or raise her voice. Her very presence carried weight. The implication was subtle but strong. Why would someone like me lie? And for many people watching, both in the courtroom and at home, that question alone was persuasive. Even the way she responded to questions reinforced that image. She never snapped. She never showed frustration. She smiled politely when interrupted. She nodded respectfully when corrected. It was a performance of grace. And performances like that are dangerous, because they blur the line between character and credibility. People don't just believe what you say, they believe you. Most people in that courtroom believed her. You could feel it in the silence, in the lack of visible skepticism, in the way the story seemed to flow without resistance. If you were watching casually, you might have already made up your mind. You might have thought, this is just another case of someone being unfairly accused. And if you would have believed her too, tap like now, because what comes next flips everything. Because beneath that calm exterior, beneath the soft voice and the carefully chosen words, something wasn't adding up. The opposing party wasn't just fighting a legal claim, They were fighting an image. An image that made them look unreasonable for even questioning her. An image that suggested doubt itself was disrespectful. And that kind of imbalance is exactly what makes a courtroom dangerous when truth hasn't fully surfaced yet. What the pastor's wife didn't realize was that while she was focused on maintaining her image, Judge Judy was watching something else entirely. Not the close, not the tone, not the title. She was watching how the story was being used, how morality was being positioned as evidence, how faith was quietly replacing facts. And when that happens, the illusion of innocence can only last so long. At this stage, the case still looked simple. A respectable woman. A nervous opponent. A story that sounded clean on the surface. But courtroom truth isn't built on appearances, it's built on consistency. And just beneath that polished narrative, the first signs of strain were already there, waiting for the wrong question to pull them into the open. The shift didn't happen with an accusation. It didn't come with raised eyebrows or a sharp remark. It started quietly, almost invisibly, the way real doubt always does. Judge Judy leaned slightly forward and began asking questions that, on the surface, seemed harmless. Simple. The kind of questions that shouldn't trouble anyone who was telling the truth. She asked about dates. When exactly did the incident occur? The pastor's wife answered smoothly at first, giving a clear response, confident and unhesitating. Then Judge Judy asked a follow-up, just a clarification, not a challenge. And this time, the answer came with an extra sentence. A small adjustment. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to notice. The judge moved on. She asked about timing. How long after the incident did certain actions take place? Again, the answer sounded reasonable. But it didn't quite sit where it should have. It overlapped with the earlier response in a way that felt crowded. As if two versions of the same moment were being layered on top of each other. Still, Judge Judy said nothing. She asked about communication next. Who was contacted first? When? The pastor's wife paused, only briefly, but long enough for the rhythm of her testimony to change. The calm cadence she'd maintained earlier tightened slightly. Her sentences grew longer, more detailed. Instead of answering exactly what was asked, she began explaining why her answer made sense. That was the first real crack. People who are telling the truth tend to answer questions and stop. People who are lying tend to answer questions and then keep talking. They add context. They justify. They reinforce. And as the questions continued, that pattern became harder to ignore. The pastor's wife wasn't contradicting herself outright, but she was adjusting, fine-tuning, shifting details just enough to stay ahead of the questions. Judge Judy noticed the tone change immediately. The softness was still there, but now it carried something else beneath it, a faint defensiveness. A need to be understood rather than simply believed. When asked a yes or no question, the answer arrived wrapped in explanation. When asked for a fact, it came packaged with emotion. The judge didn't interrupt her. She didn't correct her. She didn't even look displeased. She simply listened. Then came the timeline again, this time from a different angle. Judge Judy asked the same event to be described, but starting from another point. It's a technique she's used for decades, and it's devastating when someone isn't being fully honest. The pastor's wife began confidently, then slowed. The sequence didn't line up exactly the way it had before. Small differences, minor rearrangements, but enough to create friction. Her voice rose slightly, not in volume, but in urgency. She began stressing certain words, emphasizing intentions, explaining motivations that hadn't been questioned. It was subtle, but the courtroom could feel it. Something was being protected. Across the room, the opposing party sat quietly, watching this unfold. They didn't smile. They didn't interrupt. They looked confused, but also hopeful, as if something they hadn't been able to articulate was finally starting to surface. For the first time, the imbalance in the room shifted just a little. Judge Judy leaned back and asked another simple question. This one should have been easy. Instead, it triggered a longer response than any before it. The pastor's wife repeated herself, reframed earlier statements, clarified details no one had challenged. It was no longer just testimony, it was maintenance. That's when Judge Judy did something telling. She stopped taking note. She looked directly at the pastor's wife, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with focus. The kind of attention that feels heavy when you're on the receiving end of it. The pastor's wife kept speaking, as if silence made her uncomfortable, as if stopping would leave something exposed. But Judge Judy didn't accuse her. She didn't say, "You're lying." She didn't point out the inconsistencies. She didn't challenge her credibility. She just kept listening. And that silence was louder than any objection. Because in that silence, the audience began to feel it too. The sense that the story, once so clean and composed, was starting to bend under its own weight. Not breaking yet, just bending. The kind of bend that suggests pressure has been building for a while. The pastor's wife still believed she was in control. She still believed her explanations were convincing. She didn't realize that every extra word was narrowing her options, that every clarification reduced her room to maneuver. And Judge Judy, with decades of experience, was letting it happen. By the time the judge moved on to the next phase of questioning, the illusion of absolute innocence had softened. Not shattered, but dulled. Enough for doubt to enter the room. Enough for the audience to start asking themselves questions they hadn't considered before. Something was off. Not obviously. Not yet. But undeniably. And Judge Judy was about to find out exactly how far that misalignment went. The moment didn't arrive with drama. There was no sudden outburst, no gavel slam, no raised voice demanding order. It came quietly, in the space between questions, when Judge Judy looked down at the file in front of her, and then back up at the woman seated across from her. The room was still. The kind of stillness that makes even confident people suddenly aware of their own breathing. Judge Judy spoke calmly, deliberately, as if choosing each word with care. She reminded the pastor's wife that this was not a conversation, not a discussion, and not a place for personal narratives to evolve freely. It was a courtroom, and everything she had said so far had been said under oath. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, under oath. She explained, without hostility, what that oath meant. That lying in court wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a difference in perspective. It wasn't something that could be explained away later with good intentions. Lying under oath was a serious offense, one that carried real consequences. Legal consequences. Moral consequences. Consequences that extended far beyond embarrassment on television. The pastor's wife listened, nodding slowly, her expression composed. When she responded, her voice softened even further, as if lowering the volume would strengthen the sincerity. She didn't deny the importance of the oath. Instead, she elevated it. She spoke about her faith again. About truth. About accountability, not to the court, but to something higher. "I swear before God," she said. The words landed heavily in the room. To some, it sounded convincing. A final seal of honesty. A declaration meant to end doubt. But to others it felt like something else entirely, a deflection. A way to shift the burden away from facts and onto belief. A way to say, if you doubt me, you're not just questioning my story, you're questioning my faith. Judge Judy didn't respond immediately. She paused. Not long, but long enough for the weight of that statement to settle. Long enough for the courtroom to feel the tension it created. The pastor's wife seemed to take comfort in the silence, as if she believed she had said something unassailable. something that would shut the door on skepticism. Then Judge Judy looked up. Her tone didn't change. There was no anger in her voice. No sarcasm. No threat. Just clarity. Religion doesn't give you permission to lie in my courtroom. The sentence was simple, clean, final. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a legal correction, it was a moral boundary being drawn in real time. Judge Judy made it clear that faith, no matter how sincere or loudly declared, could not replace truth. That belief systems did not override sworn testimony. And that invoking God in a courtroom did not create immunity from accountability. For the first time since the case began, the pastor's wife looked unsettled. Not panicked, not defensive, but surprised. As if she hadn't anticipated that response. As if she had expected the weight of her religious identity to stop the questioning, not intensify it. The audience felt it too. Up until that moment, there had been hesitation, uncertainty, a reluctance to judge. But that single line cut through all of it, because it reframed the issue completely. This wasn't about faith versus doubt anymore. It was about honesty versus manipulation. Judge Judy continued, still calm, still controlled. She explained that courts deal in evidence, not virtue. In consistency, not character claims. And when someone attempts to shield themselves from scrutiny by appealing to morality instead of facts, it raises questions, not resolves them. The pastor's wife attempted to recover. She clarified what she meant. She insisted she wasn't using faith as a defense. She spoke faster now, her sentences overlapping slightly, her explanations growing more urgent. But the damage was done. The ground beneath her story had shifted. Viewers who had been neutral began to lean forward. Those who had believed her started reconsidering. The emotional balance of the case tipped. Not because Judge Judy accused her of lying, but because she refused to let belief replace proof. This was the midpoint. The line after which there was no turning back. From this moment on, the question was no longer is she telling the truth? It became why does she need faith to protect her testimony? Judge Judy didn't press further just yet. She didn't expose anything. She didn't reveal contradictions or evidence. She let that line hang in the air, knowing exactly what it would do. It stripped away the safety net the pastor's wife had relied on. It made her testimony vulnerable in a way it hadn't been before. And for the first time, the audience wasn't waiting to see if something would be revealed. They were waiting to see how bad it would be when it was. After drawing that clear moral line, Judge Judy didn't rush to expose anything. She didn't announce that she had caught a lie. Instead, she shifted the case into a quieter, more dangerous phase. The kind that feels calm on the surface but carries enormous consequences underneath. This was no longer about impressions or tone. This was about proof. She began asking for specifics, not accusations, not hypotheticals, specific. She asked about phone communication first. Who contacted whom? When exactly did those conversations take place? Were there calls? Messages? Missed calls? The pastor's wife answered quickly, almost eagerly. She insisted there was nothing to hide. She said everything she had already testified to could be confirmed. Her confidence returned, steady and composed, as if she believed this part would finally put an end to the doubt. Judge Judy nodded and moved on to messages, texts, emails, any written communication related to the dispute. Again, the pastor's wife agreed without hesitation. She stated plainly that all messages supported her version of events. She even welcomed the review, framing it as an opportunity to clear her name completely. There was a quiet certainty in her voice, the kind that suggests someone believes they've planned for every angle. Then came the financial record. Judge Judy asked about receipt, payments, transfers, dates and amounts, where the money went, when it moved. Wyatt moved. The pastor's wife straightened slightly in her chair and answered confidently. She said the financial trail was clean, transparent, honest. She emphasized that she had nothing to gain from deception and nothing to fear from scrutiny. What she didn't realize was that this confidence was exactly what made the moment so dangerous. Judge Judy listened carefully, her expression neutral. She let the pastor's wife finish every sentence. She didn't interrupt. She didn't challenge. She allowed the testimony to fully commit itself to one version of events, locked in, unmistakable, and now testable. Then Judge Judy paused. She explained, calmly and clearly, that once evidence is reviewed, testimony cannot be reshaped. That facts don't bend to intention. That records don't care about explanations. She reminded the pastor's wife that this court does not guess, it verifies. And that once proof is introduced, there is no undoing what has already been said under oath. The pastor's wife nodded again. She showed no fear, no hesitation. If anything, she looked relieved, as if she believed this was the moment where the case would finally turn in her favor, where the judge would see that the doubts were unfounded and the questions unnecessary. That's when Judge Judy delivered the warning. This is your last chance to correct your testimony. The words were not sharp. They weren't loud. But they were unmistakable. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a boundary. A moment offered not out of kindness, but out of procedure. A moment where honesty could still soften consequences, if honesty was chosen. The courtroom fell silent. For a brief second, the pastor's wife considered the moment. You could see it in her posture, in the way she inhaled before responding. This was the point where a story could change course, where a partial truth could become a full one, where damage could be reduced. She didn't take it. Instead, she doubled down. She reaffirmed everything she had already said. She insisted there were no errors, no misunderstandings, no misstatements. Her voice was steady, her expression composed, her certainty intact. She looked directly at Judge Judy and confirmed, clearly and definitively, that her testimony was accurate in every detail. That confirmation sealed it, because from that moment on, the case was no longer about what might be true. It was about what could be proven false. Judge Judy acknowledged the response and moved forward, her demeanor unchanged. But the energy in the room had shifted again. This time, it wasn't doubt, it was anticipation. The kind that makes people lean forward without realizing it. The kind that makes silence feel heavy. If you've ever seen someone lie and think they're getting away with it, don't blink. This is where everything changes. The pastor's wife still believed she was safe. She believed the evidence would support her. She believed her confidence would carry her through. She didn't realize that by agreeing so eagerly, she had stepped directly into the trap. Judge Judy hadn't said it with anger. She hadn't said it with judgment. She had said it with patience. And once the proof came out, there would be no room left to move. The moment arrived without warning, the way the most devastating moments always do. There was no build-up in Judge Judy's voice, no signal that something explosive was about to happen. She simply reached for the document in front of her and began to read. Calmly, clearly, as if she were reciting something ordinary. But nothing about what followed was ordinary. The evidence wasn't complicated. It didn't require expert interpretation or legal gymnastics. It was simple, direct, and impossible to argue with. Time-stamped messages. Dates and times printed clearly at the top of the page. Messages sent, received, and acknowledged. Each one locked into place by technology that doesn't forget and doesn't lie. Judge Judy read the first message out loud. It directly contradicted what the pastor's wife had testified to earlier. Not vaguely. Not indirectly. Precisely. The timing alone made it impossible for both versions of the story to be true. She read the second message. then the third, each one tightening the space around the testimony that had been delivered so confidently just minutes before. The courtroom went silent. Not the kind of silence filled with confusion or chatter, but the kind that follows realization. The kind where everyone understands exactly what just happened at the same time. You could feel the shift, not just in the room but in the narrative itself. The story that had once felt controlled and carefully presented was now exposed as fragile, vulnerable, wrong. Judge Judy stopped reading and looked up. The pastor's wife didn't move. Her hands, once folded neatly, were now stiff in her lap. Her face drained of its calm assurance. The soft voice that had carried her through the earlier testimony disappeared, replaced by something tighter, shallower. She blinked once, twice, as if buying time her story no longer had. Judge Judy didn't rush her. She let the silence stretch. Silence is powerful in a courtroom, especially when it's earned. Especially when it follows proof. Then came the question. So were you lying then, or are you lying now? It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was lethal. There was no third option. No explanation that could bridge the gap between the testimony and the evidence. No appeal to faith, intention, or misunderstanding that could erase timestamps and words typed by the person now sitting frozen in front of the bench. For a moment, the pastor's wife seemed to forget she was on camera. Her expression flickered, not with defiance but with panic. This was the instant her authority collapsed. The moment when the identity she had relied on no longer offered protection. The moment when the courtroom stopped seeing her as a pastor's wife and started seeing her as a witness caught in a lie. She attempted to speak, but the words came out disorganized. She began with one explanation, then stopped, switched direction, tried to reframe the messages, claimed context, claimed misunderstanding, claimed memory failure. But none of it landed. Every sentence sounded smaller than the one before it. Judge Judy didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The evidence had already done the work. What made the moment so powerful wasn't just the contradiction, it was how clean it was. No gray area. No debate. Just a clear line between what had been sworn under oath and what had been written in black and white. And once that line was crossed, there was no crossing back. The opposing party watched quietly, their expression a mix of relief and disbelief. They hadn't raised their voice. They hadn't argued aggressively. They hadn't needed to. The truth had arrived on its own schedule. The pastor's wife looked around the courtroom, as if searching for support that no longer existed. The confidence that had once filled the room around her evaporated. Her shoulders dropped. Her tone flattened. The performance was over. This was the moment people would replay. The moment clips would circulate. The moment captions would be written around. Because it captured something universally satisfying, the instant when deception meets clarity. When image meets reality. When someone who believed they were untouchable is confronted with proof that doesn't care who they are. Judge Judy waited until the pastor's wife finished stumbling through her explanation. Then she spoke again, not with anger, not with triumph, but with certainty. The kind that comes when the truth no longer needs to be argued. And from that point forward, there was no question left to answer. Only consequences to deliver. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice when she delivered the ruling. She didn't need to. The courtroom was already silent, every ounce of authority resting in the calm certainty of her tone. She looked directly at the pastor's wife, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with finality. The kind that tells you there is no argument left to make. She explained, plainly and without theatrics, that lying under oath is one of the most serious offenses a person can commit in a courtroom. Not because it disrespects the judge, but because it disrespects the entire justice system. The oath exists for one reason: to ensure that truth is the foundation of every decision made. When someone breaks that oath, they don't just lie, they poison the process itself. Then she addressed the part that mattered most. Using faith as a shield, she said, makes the offense worse, not better. Because faith is supposed to represent honesty, humility, and accountability. When someone invokes religion to protect a lie, they aren't just deceiving the court, they're exploiting the very values they claim to live by. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, that kind of manipulation would never be tolerated. The ruling was clear. The case was dismissed. The claims brought by the pastor's wife were rejected in their entirety. Any financial demands she had made were denied. Judge Judy went further, explaining that the testimony given under oath, now proven false, could have consequences beyond this courtroom. She referenced potential referrals. She made it clear that lying on national television under oath is not something that simply disappears once the cameras stop rolling. The pastor's wife sat silently as the words landed. There was no protest this time, no appeal to faith, no explanation offered. The authority she had walked in with was gone, replaced by the reality of consequences she could no longer avoid. Judge Judy turned briefly to the opposing party. She acknowledged the stress they had endured, the financial strain, the intimidation they had felt standing against someone who appeared untouchable. And she made something else very clear. The courtroom is designed to protect truth, not status. Titles don't matter. Reputations don't matter. Only facts do. With that, the case was over. But the story was just beginning. Within hours, the clip spread. Viewers across the country watched the exact moment when the lie unraveled. The time-stamped evidence. The silence. The question that left no escape. Social media lit up with reactions. Some expressed shock. Others expressed anger. Many expressed relief that accountability had won. Comment sections exploded with debate, not about faith but about honesty, about responsibility, about the danger of believing someone simply because of who they claim to be. Millions watched, shared, and replayed the moment where image finally lost to evidence. And that's why this case resonated so deeply. Because it wasn't just about one lie. It was about the reminder that truth doesn't bend to appearances, that justice doesn't pause out of politeness, and that no one, no matter how righteous they present themselves, is above accountability. If you believe truth always comes out, and you want more stories where lies meet justice, subscribe now. Because Judge Judy's courtroom never forgets.